Okay, good afternoon, everyone. Hi, good afternoon. Thanks, Dr. Ng. Okay, first I'd like to go to preempt you that I think that the internet connections in my area doesn't seem to be very stable. Just like I think I lost the previous two presenters message, at time. So just in case, okay, so just bear with me. So then I will try to come back later on if that happens. Okay, so the topic of my presentation is virtual classrooms more effective than blended e-learning as a learning platform. So I would like to put a caveat that this is actually more a case study for my university. So it probably cannot actually generalize to everyone. Okay, so okay, so the virtual classrooms seems promising as an effective learning platform, as can actually allow quite a number of different features actually, and also allow like collaborative learning opportunity for the student and the teachers as well. Okay, so some educational institutions, university like, okay, so I started to roll out the virtual classroom for learning purpose. So my university is doing the same thing as well. So even long before COVID-19, I'm twisted many university to offer home-based learning. So I think that nowadays this is quite common thing. Okay, so but we started quite earlier on. Okay, despite positive findings that suggest many the new technologies like such as the Zoom platforms and they can facilitate learning, it may be still unclear. Okay, so whether the virtual classrooms is really effective. Okay, or the student really perceive that is actually the is effective learning platform for them as well. So then I'm actually quite curious, as a head of program. So try to find that out. So until there is one research opportunity arise, so when we revamp one course, so that we can actually compare some of the student perception as well as the students results from these two different platforms. Okay, so this course is actually writing for print and emerging media, but it's been revamped to writing for online news. So this actually happened this year that we roll out. Okay, so but there are actually the same course, but just that 253. Okay, so I'm going to use 253 and 256, so that they're easier to communicate. So 253 is a blended e-course. So the predecessor was a traditional course, but we revamped it about 8 years ago from a traditional one to 253, which is a blended e-course. So 256 is a virtual course. So 8 years later, we revamped it to be a full a virtual e-course. This course provides insight into journalistic writing from the selection and presentation of a news story to writing. Okay, so COM 253 is the blended e-course as mentioned. So with 50% of the sessions being face-to-face seminars, so the other 50% are self-study components, including online activities and materials. So in terms of assessment, so the 50% we have it like overall continuous assessment. Okay, so another is the overall exam score. Okay, so under the ORCAS, so that includes 2 assignments. So we call it tutor mark assignment, okay, and the PCQ, so the pre-class quizzes. Okay, so then still need to go into also do ECA, so end of course assessment, which account for 50%. So for 256 is actually quite different because we have the DB, the discussion board, which is also part of the ORCAS, that accounts for 20%. So they only one PMA, tutor mark assignment, and then they continue to have the PCQ, the same thing. So the student continue to need to do the end of course assessment, the ECA, which account for 50%. So okay, so we have exactly the same learning outcome because as mentioned, okay, so these 2 courses are exactly the same thing, So it's just that it revamped to a virtual course. So but we changed the course title and also the course code as well. Okay, so basically this is the retrospective cohort study. So based on the existing course evaluation questionnaire, so we kind of like analyze and compare, okay, the student perception on how effective the learning can be. So we use the 5-point Likert scale. This thing actually not designed by me, it's actually by my university. So they already have this evaluation form. So the question basically evaluates the student perception on their self-reported learning experience. So one being strongly disagree. Okay, so 3 being, so 5, sorry, I think there's a typo here. 5 being strongly agree. So 3 is actually a neutral. Okay, so so we basically ask 3 questions. So the first is the course met its intended learning outcome. This is very general. Okay, just the general perception, to see if this course actually meet the learning outcome or not. Okay, so the second question, so ask about learning materials provided for this course are helpful in supporting my understanding of the subject matter, which is lower level learning outcome. So then the number 3 is the application, which is a higher level learning outcomes you're looking at. So, the questions, although it's very brief, only just 3 questions. So we asked them about a general view about, if this course actually meet the learning outcome. The second one is, does this course actually meet the lower level learning outcome? And the third question is higher level learning outcome. Okay, all right. So as I mentioned, there is a retrospective cohort study because actually we kind of use the existing data. It's very cheap, it doesn't incur further cost and all that. Okay, so this is the exciting part. We're going to share with you the finding. Okay, so this is actually the actual form, but I'm going to go into details later on. So this is the actual form. So basically for the blended e-course, which is the predecessor. Okay, so the course evaluation form, the report was done last year, April. So number of students, 88. Okay, so the student that responded to this the evaluation report, 75. So participation rate about 85. So the course this is general perceptions. Okay, it's 4.02 out of 5, like I mentioned, it's a Likert skill. Okay, so then the lower level learning outcome. Okay, so 3.92 agree. Okay, so in terms of the Likert skills, okay, so the higher level one is 3.97. Okay, so the total is 3.97 as well. So this is the blended e-course. Okay, so 256 is the full e-course. Okay, so okay, so this is also the form. Okay, so course evaluations report done actually this year in April. Okay, number of students 68. Okay, number of respondents 65. So that makes the participation rate close to 96%. Okay, so as you can see here, 4.29 for the first one, second one 4.26, the third one 4.26. That makes the total to be 4.27. Okay, so this is very simple, just statistical things, because actually, like I don't have the access to the actual data. So otherwise, okay, so I will be able to do more inferential analysis. Okay, so this is a comparison that will show you, side by side actually. So what's the score is like. Okay, so general score is 4.29 for virtual classroom. Okay, so then blended E is 4.02. Okay, so the lower level learning outcome, 4.26 for virtual classroom versus 3.92 for the blended e-learning. Okay, in view of the fact that this is actually exactly the same course, but just that we have a different format. Okay, so for the higher level learning outcome is 4.26 versus 3.97 for the blended e-course, for the blended e-learning. Okay, so the general one is 4.27 versus 3.97. It's across the board actually. So the virtual classrooms, have a higher rating. Okay, so compared to the blended e-learning. Okay, so what's the implications? So the report showed that the students have significantly more positive learning experience with virtual classroom platform. This is quite surprising for us. I'm going to explain to you later on why. Okay, so to perceive that virtual classrooms are more effective in the following 3 aspects compared to the blended e-learning platform. So in terms of like achieving the intended course learning outcome is significantly higher. Help them to understand the subject matter, which is lower understanding level, so it's also higher. So also help them acquire the knowledge and skills that which they can apply in all that, which is the higher level one. So, in all 3, they actually give a higher score for the so-called virtual classroom. Okay, so because for this paper, we are talking about the perceptions, how they perceive, that the virtual classroom can be, that is the perception, the students' perceptions of how effective the thing. Okay, so but I try to go into just take up, as a HOP, so I'll be able to have access to the result. Okay, so just share with you some of the confidential result, but this is not part of my, but I think I'm just like curious, so I think I would like to go share with you. It's quite interesting. Okay, you look at the course result. Okay, so this is the last one of the 253 cohort. Okay, the students for OCAS examination, the overall continuous assessment, student 63. Okay, so the exam, so this is the end of course assessment, aka project, so 60.58. For finals, so the average is 61.90. Withdrawal rate 5.7. So failure rate 3 point something. Okay, but I tried to go to compare with the virtual one. So allow me to go to toggling, toggle between 253 and 256. You look at it, the results are quite similar. Not that it's significantly lower or higher. So although you see, look at 256 is slightly higher for the OCAS, slightly lower for the OCAS. And then is for the end of course assessment, okay, 253 is 60.58, 60.52 is quite similar, surprisingly. Okay, so then you look at the final rank score, 61.62 for the virtual course. Okay, so for the blended E is 61.90. Okay, so I'd like to highlight that the withdrawal rate is higher, 7.54% actually for the full E course. Okay, for the blended E is 5.7. It's actually slightly relatively lower in terms of percentage, even though the number is about the same thing. Okay, failure rate is roughly the same thing also, 5.253 to 3.53%. Okay, so for the virtual is 3.17%. Okay, so I want to bring to your attention to the grade distribution. Okay, as you can see here, close to half of the student bunching in the B minus band. So which means it's quite a bell curve. Okay, so but it's the like 40-something% actually bunching in the B minus band, and no one getting like A plus, A or A minus. No one in this particular A bands. Okay, so but then for 256, okay, only 1/4 bunching in the B minus. In fact, actually, you look at it, if the overall result is about the same thing, which means they are more even. So which means the bell curve is not like, a sharp one, okay? So, but then it's more even in a way. So then we also have more students getting A as well. I think that, we have quite a number of students, close to 8% of students actually getting A or A minus, but no A plus either, because it's quite difficult to get A plus for this particular course. Okay. So when the course was revamped from a traditional classroom course to a blended e-course 253. So as I mentioned, why we are surprised. This because actually 8 years ago when we went this to a blended e-course, the student didn't really like it actually. So they give a very, very bad score. I think it's about 3.3 at the time. So the traditional one about 3.8, 3.9. Okay, so also not so impressive, but I think that that it was even lower actually. So the first time that but then subsequently, the students get used to the blended e-courses. Okay, so then the score actually kind of like go up a little bit more. Okay, so but then we realized actually this time around, the first time that we roll out the virtual course, the student perception of the learning effectiveness of full e-course is like totally different. It's immediately higher than the blended e-course. Okay, so you need to know that the student perception on the virtual classroom was already positive even before the COVID-19 pandemic affect the teaching and learning format. So because nowadays actually like for this semester, all my 20-something courses are all run in the like a full E, but just that this is, even though it's a kind of like a tentative measures for now, but I think that so now students is getting more and more used to the going. But this actually happened. This course, as I mentioned, it was rolled out before COVID-19 was an issue. Okay, so then I need to go share with some of the limitations. It is still a respondent's perception. So because it's something they report. Okay, so it's the effectiveness they are reporting. There are still two different groups of students because these are cohort studies, right? Okay, so we are comparing two different cohorts, one from the 19th and one from the 20th this year. So the two different cohorts, they are exactly different students. Okay, so then some people will comment that there are two different students. Okay, so then inferential analysis is unlikely because actually we do not have the so-called the actual data. So no, we just based on whatever thing been given to us. So even though this is even if it's a panel study, like say we get one particular student to go through a thing, but unlikely to get them to go through the same course again. So I think even the second time they're having the same course, I think the experience will be different. So I think that this will be quite unlikely they're going to do like a panel study either. Okay, so if budget allow, of course, actually you like to go and examine it a bit more, because you look at the three aspects you're looking at is the general perception of the learning outcome. Okay, so then second is the lower level learning outcome. Then the third one is the higher level. But in fact, actually, you look at like even the Bloom taxonomy, they will already have 6 levels kind of learning outcomes. You know, so it's good to actually to go into analyze it a little bit further. Okay, so I think that I'm sticking to my time. So yeah, if any questions, okay, feel free. Okay, yeah, thank you so much. Over to you, Dr. Ng.
Yes. Thank you for your presentation first. Any question from the floor? Then may I ask the questions? I want to know more details about how can you classify them as virtual classroom platform and blended e-learning platform? Of course, it depends on the teaching strategy. But I mean, how can you group the student into this using virtual classroom and versus the blended e-learning?
Okay, yeah. Allow me to go to explain a little bit further. This course actually, they are exactly the same course, but just that it's been revamped actually from a blended e-course to a virtual e-course. So then the student cannot choose, because actually this course already turns out to be a virtual course from January 2020 onwards actually. So it's already become a virtual e-course. So the student cannot choose, then we don't group them. So which means previously it was a blended e-course. Okay, but by design, the difference between our blended e-course and the virtual e-course is like, you know, so the main difference is like this one, you know, the blended e-course at least at 50% face-to-face sessions. So this one totally do not have any face-to-face session, no physical contact time. So which means it's only through Zoom. Okay, but this one, okay, so if they have the face-to-face session together with some online components, some online activities, you know, and so that, and all that. And secondly, the assessment is different for these two types of courses. Okay, so the two types of courses, because like the blended E1, so the discussion board is not counted. There's no discussion board at all. So, but then for virtual course, discussion board is a very important component. So, which means it's actually part of the assessment. The student need to go to party. It's actually account for 20%, which is very high percent. Yeah. So, yeah, 2 by 6. You see, we take out one tutor mark assignment and make it a DB, a discussion board. So, but then for the blended, we don't have any discussion board. So which means the full E, besides the student cannot see the lecturer at all, besides the Zoom, okay, not the physical one, because you know that I think we are not talking about technical aspect here, but basically for virtual classroom and the blended here, actually we have a kind of face-to-face sessions. I think the dynamic is quite different actually. So I think that some of us actually now have to use virtual, just like I think that even for this conference, okay, so we are presenting using Zoom and all that. I believe, okay, when you are presenting in person, okay, with a group of audience or something like that, the dynamic, okay, so the interactions would be somehow different in terms of format and in terms of the atmosphere and all that. So I think that this is something that we try to go into to study here. So, but then the finding, as I mentioned, surprisingly, okay, so the student, they have very positive perception towards the so-called the virtual classroom, which is totally surprising, because actually when we revamp this course actually from a traditional course to a blended e-course, which already, you know, from the 100% face-to-face, okay, so to 50% face-to-face, we try to see the difference immediately. Okay, so the reaction was actually quite negative. Yeah. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for your question, Dr. Ng. Yeah. I can't hear you, Dr. Ng. Are you saying something?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay, yeah. Yeah. Well, someone saying something, because I could hear the muffled sound, but I think that now it's better. Okay.
Yeah, because this are very much important in your research, because it depends on how you classify the two groups of students to obtain the results in your research. Yeah, and are there any questions from the floor? Seems no. And then I have another questions actually. What are the most important thing that by the way, is there a virtual classroom platform significantly different from the banded e-learning platform? I mean, they have a difference in the mean, but is the differences significantly different?
Okay, so I think so far, I think that as I can see from the statistics, okay, the numbers and something like that. Okay, so then because we measure the perception, so which means the student, this is actually the key objective of this particular paper. We actually focus on perception, student perception on how effective this learning platform is and all that. So we try to compare. Obviously, actually, virtual one, have a higher score and all that. Okay, so then another way to look at it is look at the result, because we didn't change the difficulty level of the assessment, no, which means the TMA whatsoever. The only difference is the DB. The discussion board actually is a unique thing for virtual classroom, but it's not and was not available for the blended e-course. So this is the only difference. Other than that, okay, so that's why I let you see but this is not part of my study, but just that I'm out of curiosity. So I tried to go and find out, okay, so what is the difference? Okay, as you can see here, the result is actually very interesting. These two, you look at the differences. Okay, so in terms of, okay, this one I would say that this thing, okay, so because do not have a discussion board, this one come with a discussion board. Okay, so but the thing is the end of course assessment, they are exactly the same thing. They're not changing and make it even more challenging or something. The difficulty level are exactly the same thing. You see the students scoring roughly the same thing also. So which means actually slightly lower for the virtual e-course, but they are roughly the same standard actually. So not you're not performing worse, like for example 50 something. Okay, so this is alarming. Okay, so we just been doing roughly the same thing. So just in terms of the so-called performance, but even though this is not part of the studies, it's not part of the study, because actually the study is on perception, which is already mentioned here. This is a perception when they're answering the student.
Okay, thank you for your reply, and seems that it's time for us to have a 3 minutes break before the next session of the panel discussion. You will start at 10 to 1. Yeah, thank you everyone.
Okay, thank you so much. Yeah, thank you so much.
Yeah.